was a major form of entertainment during this period. Queen Elizabeth herself enjoyed dancing and could play a few instruments. But really, this is all summed up best by the author of Buzzle.com's article on Elizabethan music, Kashmira Lat, who says, "Unlike the scenario today, in the ancient days, a man who could not sing to win the hearts of others with his perfect voice was not considered to be a gentleman." I have no excuse, I just had to include that here. Music was around in all forms, from folk music sung on the streets to church music, to musicians who were hired to play for the wealthy. As far as street music goes, the days of the travelling minstrels were sadly behind us. No, not because of their minstrelness, but because of their travelling. Why? Key historical idea: the plague. More specifically, the Black Death, which had occurred about 200 years before. We have to remember that this was a time of reasonable medical ignorance. It wasn't terrible. It was certainly better than it had been in the Dark Ages, but we were still in the middle of what's been dubbed as the medical renaissance. But that didn't mean that people grasped the concepts of plagues and such, not the sciencey stuff. But what they did understand was that sick travellers would come to their village, people in their village would then get sick, and then those people would go to other villages and get their people sick. And before long, everybody's dying. It's for this reason that travellers became kind of frightening, and people became very wary of them. As people kind of clocked on to what was happening, travelling became more and more discouraged by the Elizabethan government, and if you wanted to travel somewhere, you would require a licence. One does not simply travel around Elizabethan England. And that was great if you didn't want to die, but it wasn't great if you were a minstrel. So instead, street musicians, along with tavern and theatre musicians, took up the role of keeping everybody merry, playing instruments light enough for them to carry around with them, such as fiddles, recorders, lutes and small percussive things. And they would go around singing folk songs, and everyone's traditional crowd favourites. This was quite different, though, to the refined music you were likely to find in the court. The court would often hire sophisticated musicians to play sophisticated music, beautifully composed consort pieces, and solemn religious music. But it's important to point out that traditional ballads and dance music was included as well. We all need something to dance to. Outside the palace, other aristocrats were also in a financial place where they could hire musicians to play for them during dinner or whatnot. And even the lower brim of the upper class would have a servant or two that could play an instrument when the time came. And then there was religious music, which made up a big part of the average person's exposure to music. Before the Reformation, hymns and other kind of music had been normal, just an accepted part of a church service. And we have to thank the religious music all over Europe for a lot of our historical musical development. It provided a base for all composers to learn off and work from. Plus, we can't forget it gave us musical notation. However, after the Reformation, everyone's opinion on music's place in the church was a little bit split. The Puritans wanted to get rid of all church music, along with all other decorative elements of Catholicism. Other radicals rejected anything that wasn't 100% directly quoted from the Bible. Martin Luther was a prolific hymn writer, believing that through song he could teach his beliefs to his followers. Catholics just wanted to be Catholic, but overall most, including Queen Liz herself, enjoyed the element of church far too much for it to be taken away. But yet again, this is history. There were always two sides to a story. Some historians tell us that the singing was not stopped at all, and other historians give us account of hundreds of organs being taken out of churches and made into pewter dishes. Key historical idea: an English Bible. Another thing to remember is that in 1539, King Henry VIII authorised the Bible, which had always been in Latin, to be translated into English and read in all English churches. This not only meant that your average, uneducated, non-Latin speaking churchgoer could finally understand what the Bible was saying to them, and not what their priest was saying to them, but it also gave composers a whole lot of new material to work with. However, as some Puritans did point out, there were some mistakes in that translation. But by the third translation, in the King James Bible, authorised and published in 1611, everyone was kinda happy. It was translated by 47 translators, using as many sources as they possibly could, and upon its publication it became known throughout England very quickly as the standard version of the Bible. That brings us to the end of this segment. But the most important thing here to remember about music is that it was used at the time to combine a very separated society. When Elizabeth came to the throne, she had to deal with her country being split by religion, and a society that doesn't get along with one another finds it hard to do things like keep an economy afloat. The Elizabethan religious settlement combined the people in theory, but it was such things as keeping music as part of a church service that combined them in spirit. The Bishop of Salisbury explains it well in 1560 when he writes from London, "Religion is now somewhat more established than it was. The practice of joining in church music has very much helped with this. You may now sometimes see, at St. Paul's Cross, after the service 6,000 persons, old and young, of both sexes, all singing together and praising God." My question today partly goes out to the religious folk. Do you most feel connected with your fellow humans when you're singing worship songs? Or do you go to a service without any singing? Do you wish there was singing or not? And for the not-so-religious people out there, tell us the moments in your life where music has made you feel part of the bigger picture of humanity. Whether it was a particular concert, or singing in a choir, or just singing with your friends. Put it in the comments below. The link to the quiz can be found down in the description, along with a link to the citations and references. I'm Alika, and this has been How to Party Like It's 1599. Thanks for watching.